Hi, Britt.
Hi,
Welcome.
Addie. Thank you.
Wow, it's so fun to have you on the podcast.
It's fun to
Um,
see your studio,
yeah,
your virtual studio.
it's so high tech, huh? It's literally just like a Zoom room.
I mean, it looks
No,
pretty
it's
fancy
on
to me.
Riverside. It's on Riverside. Um, okay, wow. I wanted to have you on to debrief the event we just hosted, but I wanted to first have you introduce yourself to folks that don't know you.
Yeah. Um, I am a mom to an amazing toddler. A sister, a daughter, a partner. Those things always come to the forefront for me. Right now, I'm also a coach, both do like leadership coaching as well as running coaching for women. And I'm a facilitator. So, very interested in kind of how we design gatherings and how we honor people's time and what it looks like to consider the process in the smallest of things to larger multi day sorts of things. Yeah, that's
Awesome.
me.
That's great. We have do you know that we have like the exact same intro? I don't know if you've heard me introduce myself recently. I don't know where
I don't
that
know if I
was.
have.
On the trail ahead, there was an episode where I literally like went through those roles as well because they were very important to me too.
Mm.
Um, and we just went to Footprints together in October, was it? And Britt was, you were instrumental in facilitating many aspects of that week. I know we all came in as mentor, like a mentor role for Dakota and for the campers. I don't know. I always think that's such an interesting term
Yeah,
because I
our
learned more
friends.
from them, our friends, exactly, our community, our family, very much so. But we spent a week together in Vermont talking about climate action while also trail running, hiking, paddling. There's a lot of paddling involved. That was fun.
We got
Um,
lucky.
but that was a great experience. And then I did, because you're here, I did also want to ask you about your aha moment on climate, because that question played a role in our event that we did this past weekend. So I was like, I need to ask if Britt has one or what Britt says.
Yeah. I mean, listen to all your podcasts and I've always kind of reflected on it too. And there have been times where like, oh, I don't know, like was it more gradual for me? But more recently I was thinking about how I grew up. I grew up in Houston, Texas, and obviously, it's a place prone to hurricanes and flooding. And that was a big part of our lives growing up. And an image that came to mind recently was when Hurricane Katrina came into the Gulf. We didn't know at precisely the time where it was going to land, and I have this image of like piling into the car with my mom and my sister. I think my dad was, I don't know where he was, and we like get onto I-10, the big interstate, going through the state, just trying to get out of town as quickly as possible, and it just being gridlocked. And I'd never, traffic is also a huge part of life down there, but never like, just with some fear and some uncertainty and just being stuck in traffic. Nobody's moving. You see people getting in and out of their cars, like just being in that scenario at such a young age. I forget exactly how old I was, but I was younger. And yeah, just like having to confront that. Like, what do we do? What's going to
Mm-hmm.
happen? It was scary. We ended up turning around and going to my grandparents and kind of hunkering down. And of course, it ended up devastating New Orleans. But yeah, just having
Yeah.
to face that was something that hit me early. And I've certainly had more of a lens to natural disasters. And of course, their increasing frequency
Yeah.
nowadays. And yeah, it shapes you in a way. You see the world a little bit differently, especially just the throngs of people involved and trying to figure out where to go and what are the resources there and who are you? Yeah. Who are you calling
Yeah.
to be safe and
What
all,
do you
and then all the
do?
people that weren't on the highway that couldn't get
Right.
on the highway.
Right.
So yeah, I'd say that struck me early.
Yeah. And I mean, I grew up in Maine where we would get like, it was always sort of like, we would get like the tail end of hurricanes, and it would be almost like, I feel weird even saying this, but it would almost be like fun because it was like a big
Mm.
storm coming through that like all the surfers got ready. People do surf in Maine, interestingly. I mean, I loved it growing up, but like people don't think that people do surf in Maine. And it was an interesting thing because as a kid, it felt more of like an event that we were sort of like,
Mm,
yeah, we were, I wouldn't say looking forward to, but there was definitely an element of like, I don't know, like natural disasters growing up weren't as prevalent there because we didn't have wildfires and we didn't have, I mean, and now there is like more flooding that and sort of seeming sea level, I know sea level rises over time, but like wave surges that happen with storms in Maine. But it felt like I did not grow up proximate to wildfires in California or the hurricane devastation that like was potentially going to hit Houston. So I always am interested to talk to people who grew up in that context, or even earthquakes, which I know aren't necessarily like related directly to climate, but just that like feeling of, you know, having to learn an earthquake drill, or like we didn't
sure.
really have to do that. So it's always kind of an interesting thing. Um, Again, okay, wow, this could be like a full podcast episode. Maybe we need to do that at some point, but this is for a debrief. The context I will add here though too is that you and I met doing like a was it Epic Relay at the
Epic
time?
relays. I don't, does it
Epic
still
Relay.
exist? I don't know.
I don't know if it still exists, but it was sort of like a Ragnar style. Like we had two different vans. It was like a relay handoff, and you run from point A to point B with a team of 12 people, 6 and 6,
Mm-hmm.
I think. And I remember Britt being in the other car, and someone was like, I think you'd really like Britt, be really good friends with Britt. And I was like, who's that? And then we never met over the course of the race. And then, of course, at the end we met, and I was like, oh, yeah, this girl's amazing. So we've been friends ever since, which I think is awesome. And this, you know, footprints brought us closer, even closer together. But I feel like in the last few years, we've been noodling on like, what do we want to do together in the trail space, in the outdoor space. And I think I put out an episode with Heems, who is a speaker at our
Mm-hmm.
event, Flash Forward, and you called me or texted me and said, hey, because they had a comedy show this past weekend that we mentioned in the episode, and Britt was like, I think you should come out to the show, and I think we should do an activation. And so I was curious if you could talk about like what the activation was, but also how you thought up this concept. I know we like co-designed some elements of it, but you really took like a traditional panel of speakers and kind of like broke it open, redesigned it, made it way more interactive. And I was wondering if you could just talk, like, before we get into how it went, just kind of the design and even your thought process of creating something like this.
Well, selfishly, I wanted to hang out with you, and being in
That's
Manhattan
really where it
was
stems from.
it was a prime opportunity to lure you here.
So
Uh,
good.
yeah, so I just have been leaning into facilitation more and more the past few years because I just think like there's so much talk of innovation in so many sectors, right? And I think we often think about like, oh, the latest tech gadget or the latest way to capture carbon or the latest way. Like it's more. I don't know. In my brain, sort of the assumption is like it's more like the product that's created or something.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't think as many, or I don't hear as much like, well, what about the way in which we do things or the process?
Mm-hmm.
And I think, you know, we've all been to conferences before, maybe not all of us, but, you know, many of us go to these conferences. There's sort of like just a kind of an established way of being at them. Like people kind
Mm-hmm.
of just assume it's going to go this way. It's been done like this for a long time. We sit in a room, we stare at, you know, at a panel of the designated experts, everybody's sitting down, they're talking at us.
Yeah.
There's very little opportunity to have a two-way exchange. You don't meet anybody you're sitting next to. You kind of enter the room, you exit the room.
It's very intimidating or just frustrating sometimes.
Or just kind of dry, and the responses are often canned. They're, you know, language they've been given to represent their organization appropriately. Which is all fine. There's a place for that, I suppose. But I've just thought a lot about maybe there's a better way to do that. You know, I'm naturally more of an introvert, so I find those environments just not suited for my natural way of being, I guess. I've always thought like structure and process can kind of let people relax and feel a little freer if they know like, oh, this is the way we're going to interact, and this is the, you know, we're both going to like kind of equally answer this question, or we're both going, you know, there's a understood set of
Definitely.
expectations for how we're going to come together in this moment. So there's that piece of it. And then like as an athlete and as a runner, I live in New York City now, and there are just infinite run clubs and community runs, and it's like really fabulous. And I find in the past, I've often shown up to these, and again, there is often not like a welcome moment and like, oh, I see that you're new here. Like, welcome to the crew today. Here's what we're going to do. And we're so excited you're here. And here's how, we'd love you to integrate and meet people. I sort of just show up, go through the workout. It's nice. It's a nice day. You're with people. That's lovely. But then you leave feeling like, or at least I shouldn't say we, like I would leave feeling like, did I really meet anyone? Would I go back? Did I feel integrated and welcomed? Not only like welcomed in the beginning, but then like at the end, welcomed to return. So like kind of bridging those concepts, like as an athlete and somebody who loves to move and be outside, and being somebody who cares about, this like furthering dialogue on issues that I care about in social and environmental spaces, and like wanting to learn from people who are doing great work. Like, what would it look like to kind of merge those and get people like moving and in nature while having meaningful conversations and meeting people? What could that look like? So, following your and supporting your amazing work with Where the Climate Things Are just seemed like a natural nudge, maybe, to say like, you're doing so much work in the digital space, the media space. Like, what if there was an in-person component? Like, if it is about building an inclusive movement in the outdoors, like, how about that in real life as well, like as a complement to the amazing storytelling? So it was born from like the idea of experimenting and hanging out with you.
I love it. No, and it's so good because everyone we ended up kind of pitching this to, and even more, which we'll talk about, everyone was like, oh, that's an amazing, like, how has no one done this before?
Right,
it's an amazing idea. So the structure was, we decided we would run with speakers together to a designated spot, and then we would have a couple folks sort of talk about their work in climate action. And the other piece here was we wanted to have folks who were from different backgrounds. So we definitely had like, we had a friend of mine who works at the UN. We had a friend who's, and a former guest who's an environmental justice lawyer. And we also had another friend. A lot of these we pulled from a lot of our friends for this, because it was a very, as Britt mentioned, like early experimenting moment. And it felt like we wanted to have folks who were working on climate broadly from like different backgrounds, who maybe didn't, come up in this space, hasn't studied this for years, is now getting involved in a way of like, we need to just mobilize people and create community around climate. And so what was really interesting is we had one speaker, Adam Met, who's a member of the band AJR, which I don't think a lot of people knew there. And some people aren't familiar with the music, but definitely go look it up because they're actually huge. And he is now he's now entered into the climate world as this speaker, facilitator, policy representative. Like, he's really showing up at a lot of these different conferences and moments and meetings and trying to push for new legislation. It's pretty incredible, and using his platform to do so. And so when I wrote to him, he said, we got on a call and he said, well, I'd love to do this, but I'm not a runner. And then his next thing was like, but I read your email, and I was like, am I a runner? Like, could I be a runner?
Yes, you are.
And so, but what he unlocked for us, shout out Adam, was the walking portion of this. And so I think you and I both had been like, had like, I will acknowledge like my own bias of, there's like able-bodied or like I can't, to be honest though, like I'm also injured. And so that was an interesting like frame of like, the injured person was like, yeah, I can like stick it out for a couple miles of a run. Like, we got this. And then when Adam ended up bringing in this mode of transportation of like, let's walk, Britt and I then figured out how to integrate walking. And so we actually had, I'm so happy he did that, because we had kiddos on scooters join. We had a dog join. My friend who is 8 months pregnant, shout out Eleanor, joined and was able to walk with us. Myself, who has a not so great knee right now was able to walk. And it was sort of this like aha moment for me hearing that unlock of, hey, you know what? He never said anything like you're going to get more people that way, but we did get way more people that way to have a walking option. So we ended up having the walkers go one way around the bridle path in Central, or in, I guess, around the reservoir, but sort of on the bridle path
in Central Park,
which is so cool because it's funny, like when people asked me about, oh, why New York? Like, why did you choose New York for this event or for the first event? And I felt like there's no other place for it because there's something about that city that's so, it's so magical. I mean, I love New York, and I know, you know, living in New York, I think there's a lot of folks that really want to be more outside and maybe more outdoor, quote unquote, outdoorsy, or like get to mountains, get to trails. But the reality is for a lot of people, like the parks, the urban parks in New York City are phenomenal, and they are the unlocked outdoor recreation on the weekends, maybe. Or I guess maybe I should say like during the week, maybe folks leave on the weekends. I don't know. It's hard. It's like, maybe not. I think there's a lot of outdoor recreation that happens in the city. And so that was something we wanted to highlight by being in Central Park, in the center, like Saturday morning, a lot of people running by. We had like a bunch of folks kind of out and about that weren't in the group, but that like even could hear the speakers, which was cool. And we had the walkers go one way and the runners go another way. So like I led a group out and Britt went another way and led the runners. And I don't know how you felt, but like it was so exciting to see y'all each time. Like it was sort of this like, yeah, like people were cheering and, you know, like it was really fun to kind of come back together. And then at those moments where that's where the speakers would speak.
Yeah, I think it worked out really great because we like magically kind of stopped where we ended up where we started. And with the two groups and being in opposite directions, we were just kind of like the runners would kind of catch up with the walkers a little bit quicker. And then the loop of the bridle path worked out like so that we could have 3 stops, which is just a nice rhythm for patterns and repeating processes. And it did feel like, oh, we're a team. And some people are walking, some people are running, but we're all in this together and we're all going to hear the same, speaker prompt us to kind of think more deeply. And then at the end of each speaker, we would offer a prompt for discussion. And we would say, find somebody you don't know for this next, it ended up being about like 10 minutes or so section of walking or running, introduce yourself, and then share your response to this prompt. And we did that, 3 times too. So it was fun to think about like, okay, so what are prompts that feel accessible to people who may not know each other, that's not too intimidating, but also will like lead to something deeper and more meaningful than you might get at like kind of a surface level interaction when you're kind of just like quickly networking somewhere. And that was a fun challenge to think about the sweet spot there.
That was what I was going to say was that was actually what I heard the most feedback on in a positive way, was people loved, because I saw some folks that showed up to the event at the comedy show and I saw more people throughout the weekend. Like I went to a running event with Heems and Stecco on Sunday, and Women Making Moves, amazing event. Shout out Tammy and others. And people loved the prompts that you innovated into this. People were very excited to show up, and even if they came with friends, to meet new people. And for the more introverted, and even like, I guess I can say I can trend extroverted, but I get really nervous in those settings and need a prompt. And I like I need that guidance to go up to someone new and say, hey, do you want to talk about climate action? That's like the geeky part of me where I'm like, hey, do you want to talk about this thing that they just told us to talk about? It's like them, like the preschooler in me. I channel my inner Leo, which is Britt's daughter. So I felt like that was a really magical component to it, where it wasn't just speakers, as you said, in kind of the panel description you gave before, like the traditional panels, sort of speakers hold the mic and speak at a crowd. And there's maybe some Q&A, but there's less like inner crowd dialogue. And I really appreciated that part of our event that you facilitated was, okay, you just heard from these speakers who are kind of standing amongst this group anyways, and it feels way more inclusive and community-based already. but then adding in this prompt of, okay, go walk or run and talk to someone about your aha moment on climate or your favorite climate solution. And I just had a lot of people come up to me and say, that was my favorite. Like, all of this was great, and that was my favorite part. So
I'm so
that's cool.
glad.
Yeah.
I'm so glad because I think, yeah, a big like hypothesis in this was like that the attendees who may not have been designated speakers for this particular version could just as equally be designated a speaker at another one, because those of us who attend panels or conferences, etc., have a lot to offer. We have our own lived experiences and stories. Like, why not have there be a way that, sure, you hear from folks who are doing like very interesting work to tell a story about all the ways in which it's possible to be involved, and that you let people interact with one another and see like what serendipity can emerge from that. Because everybody there, one, cares about this, and two, is likely doing something really interesting that would be meaningful for somebody else to hear. And that's, I think, the beauty of like thoughtfully thinking through how to connect folks, because then things emerge that you may not get to if it were just like, okay, talk to people, like
Totally.
go off and talk. And that's what, yeah, I just think like the way we design gatherings is a way to care for people. It's a way to honor their precious time. It's a way to be, thoughtful about how we exist and interact as humans, and build relationship. And so I think I think for some people it can sound like, oh, that sounds so rigid, or like, why not just like be fluid and talk about whatever you want to talk about. And sometimes I think that just does a disservice to people's time. So that's my curiosity is like, if we provide a little bit more structure and design it, like maybe that will then lead to like, yeah, these serendipitous moments of connection that people will look back and be like, wow, thank you for that structure. Like that really enabled me to really be myself and to share things I wouldn't otherwise like be able to access in kind of just like a super wide open forum. So I'm really glad to hear that those landed and it didn't feel too structured.
No, absolutely. I think also I find that people maybe notice, or there's something about having light structure in those settings where you almost don't, when it works, you almost like don't know it's there, if that makes sense. So then it's hard to know, but then it's hard to know like the other side of that, where if you don't have any structure, then it feels like too wide open. So I almost feel like I walk away from some of these things being like, oh, I actually went to an event yesterday where there was sort of a panel. I mean, I was in a room sitting down, but there was sort of a panel. There was like breakout discussions we brought back. And I didn't really think through like all of the, until now, all of the planning that went into that. And it just sort of felt like, oh yeah, I went to an event. But then I realized it was actually like very thoughtfully curated. And I think you almost don't know about that until you see the opposite of that, right? Where there's just like no structure and no careful plan to kind of bring people through, because then, as you said, there's no necessarily way to bring, like I met people there that we had a mutual friend in common that they work with. And I was like, okay, I'm really grateful that like we had an introduction time, that was really important too. So I also think the other thing that I am very grateful for in this case, in this event, was the addition of movement. And I think that you and I both, like, that was sort of the thesis here. And it is the thesis of within where the climate things are. The through line is outdoor recreation. Like, there are a bunch of climate podcasts, there are a bunch of climate media storytelling initiatives that are incredible. And I think not a lot of them, or only a few of them, focus on this like idea that outdoor recreators, that has a very broad definition, can be, are really in nature so much and want to protect it and want to be involved in climate action, even if they have no background in that, or like they are the ones that are so close to the trails, to the waves, to the water, to the mountains, and then thus like can bring a lot to this conversation. So the idea of getting outside though and moving together, I think, was quite an interesting other unlock, where I felt like, I don't know, there's something about, like, I don't know about you, but I've had some of my best and closest conversations either on a run or a walk. And I think that like that element of movement was really unique. and got people, like, it quite literally just like gets your blood flowing more. And
Yeah,
it just, you know what I mean? It kind of breaks open that like
100%.
stiff feeling of a panel.
Well, it's also just like so much of communication is body language and how we read each other. And I think like the face to face conversation can feel confrontational. You know, we think about, or I will think about like, are they perceiving that I'm looking in their eyes? Or, you know, like, am I looking like I'm engaged? And, you know, this
Totally.
whole other narrative that sort of like when you're side by side and you're moving like forward in tandem is sort of erased in a way where you're still together, but you're not, um, you know, there's not the pressure to like be looking like directly face to face. And I just think that can
Yeah.
like release us to just open up in ways that can feel very much like we're in this together and we're moving forward together. Plus just, you know, all of the, like there's much research, you know, it's easy to say that we can find where this research is, but like that will
Yeah.
say that being in green spaces unlocks new ways of creativity, helps us refuel and be more productive as humans. Not that being productive is the ultimate goal, but it just helps us access these places that feel, you know, like help us find clear mindedness, openness, like, yeah, it refills our tank, right? And I just think that those are all conditions that enable like more genuine connection. Um, so yeah, I think it's like that was essential, right, to this idea. Um, and I think people want it. I think people crave it.
Definitely.
It's like, what if all meetings were done walking and
I
outside?
know. I know. It'd be pretty amazing. Yeah, we had a couple people at the end say, you know, there hasn't been a lot of hope out there lately and it's feeling pretty dark. And like meeting up in Central Park on a Saturday morning actually felt like quite powerful for some, it seemed. So I'm very, very excited for where this might go. So I don't know. I mean, I feel like you and I have kind of ideated a little bit on this, but yeah, I want to see where we can take this. Like, I think this is such a replicable idea. I mean, your partner was saying, what if you just went to even like medical conferences and showed up and like designed? It's a design and a format that can port onto other events or gatherings of folks. And yeah, I don't know. I'm like so excited to see where we want to take this together, and not just in the climate space, beyond.
Yeah, I mean, it's like better networking, right? It's like a new way of networking that is more, um, yeah, just like ideally thoughtful and like healthy in the way that we can express and move and be in nature. And I think there's a longing for it. You know, people feel lonely, people feel isolated, people feel like they're on their devices too much. Um, and I think this is like a simple way to kind of reorient our way of, you know, connecting. Um, and it's not like it's accessible to like it's always been there, right? Like this idea of like getting together with people who you might find common interests with and like talking about it and moving and being outside. Like that's not it's not like a groundbreaking idea, but it is like kind of uh like a coming home to like the ways in which like humans gather. And I think
Yeah,
and I think that's refreshing for people. Um,
definitely.
we've been kind of like lured away into this like digital world, and I think people are longing to have those moments where they're, you know, kind of back to fundamentals.
Yeah, definitely. That's a really interesting way to put it, because I feel like you're right. We're not doing anything crazy innovate, or I mean, it's like it's yes, we are. It feels quite different in this day and age, but I feel
Mm-hmm.
like, you know, like the kid in me, I don't know, or like the child
Yeah,
growing up in Maine would be like, yeah, I meet up and walk outside with my friends all the time or whatever. So,
totally.
and that's a, you know, that's, I think it's in that way, you know, going back to basics, whatever you want to say, like stripping all the digital pieces away. And I'm so, so happy that now where the climate things are is not just a digital presence, it's also like an in person reality that people can join. So thanks to you
Yeah.
for that.
Well, they
And
complement each other.
yeah, they do. They do. And I really wanted to have events. I think I just didn't know exactly what they would look like. So it was like that idea was in my head, but then you offered the structure and the design of the whole thing, which was so perfect. So there was no way when you texted that, I was like, yeah, we got to do this. There's no way I could say
Well,
no because this is what I
you
want.
made the effort to get out here and pull it together, and
Yeah, no, it was
it was really fun.
such a fun weekend. Thank you for your facilitation, your design, your conspiratorship of bringing this to life. Because again, I said this to you, but I was like, I would never. This wouldn't be possible without you. Like from like a physical perspective, but also an emotional, like emotional support of like we've got this together. You know, like doing an
Yeah.
event is really hard and sometimes scary, at least for me. And so it was really great to have you as the co-designer, co-facilitator. Thank you. Thank you for joining me to debrief the event and experience the podcasting behind the scenes for the first time.
Yeah.
But yeah,
It's
Britt,
super fun.
thank you. I'm so excited to see what we do together in the future.
Me too. Yeah, it's always a joy getting to be with you, Addie, and just also dream. You're like the most fun person to think big and dream big with. So like finally we're kind of making things happen, and it feels really good. Feels like it was meant to be. So let's keep doing it.
Totally. I love it. Thank you.